Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to welcome you today to CityDNA's webinar, where we will delve into our new groundbreaking report on how DMOs can drive social community and well-being. And on behalf of CityDNA, I'm proud to present, this webinar that will show the vital work that calls for transformation in destination management organization worldwide. We have created this report in close partnership with TOPOSOPHY, and this report reimagines the future of tourism and advocates for a new approach to measure success, not just in economic terms, but in the comprehensive well-being of our communities. This report is an extension of our regeneration strategy that we started last year, and that is focusing on meaningful key performance indicators and global best practice to guide DMOs into today's challenges. So this report has 8 impact themes covering everything from community engagement in tourism planning to ensuring that our cities are inclusive and welcoming. And by embracing those themes, we can create a more resilient, inclusive model for tourism and for our DMOs, because our ultimate goal, as you know, is for European cities to flourish as vibrant places to live, work, meet, and explore. And I look forward to exploring this vision with you all today. And I'm very well accompanied by Peter Jordan and Chris Armstrong from TOPOSOPHY, and together with one of our members, Visit Belfast, with Rachel Magican. And it's time to start. And Peter, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Flavie. Very kind for your introduction there. Great. Chris is just putting our presentation up on the screen. It's excellent. Well, again, thank you very much to all of you for joining us this afternoon. We are really looking forward to jumping into a topic which, as Flavie said, we know is really climbing up the agenda. Of course, not just for destination marketing and management organizations or the tourism industry businesses, but actually for city authorities more generally, developers, investors, all of those who care about the livability of cities. So just over a week ago, we were among friends and colleagues from across Europe at the CityDNA Spring Conference in Bologna. It was a brilliant event. And we know that we could see in every single session the issues around community involvement in decision making, social impact, resident sentiment, and they were constantly coming up in every session. We know actually from our own work in TOPOSOPHY with cities such as Edinburgh, Amsterdam, Glasgow, Belfast, Bruges, Cambridge, cities of many different characteristics and sizes, that cities are in the end under pressure to show how the visitor economy can have a deeper impact and more meaningful impact on the lives of their local residents in a positive way. And this doesn't, and also it's important as we go forward, of course, and especially how these days there's a lot of mistrust in the air among local people. It's important that this doesn't just hang in the air as nice sounding words or phrases, but it actually translates into concrete, tangible actions that can be measured for their effectiveness. So Chris, if we go on to the next slide with the different publications. So in the end, this impact then of the visitor economy on people and in particular local residents has been at the heart of many of our publications that we've developed for City Destinations Alliance over the years. And you may be familiar with some of these. We've been collaborating now for 8 years. In fact, back in 2017, in the Manifest on the Future of DMOs that you can see just towards the left of the screen there, we were warning about the need for cities to include residents in their decision-making more thoroughly and consistently if they were to avoid what we were calling burnout and backlash. And of course, the cases of cities where this has occurred or is occurring around Europe is very well documented, but increasingly we can see protests in coastal and rural areas too, as I'm sure you may have seen in the news, for example, from the Canary Islands not so long ago, just in the last couple of weeks. So just on to the next one there, Chris. The fact is that our towns, cities and villages do face far greater challenges than tourism just alone. You might remember seeing the publication on the left here, That in our report there about exploring the role of the placemaking and marketing organization, there we set out the strategic case for improving social sustainability. But we know now, and we know very well, that it's time to go deeper and support destinations everywhere as much as we can with a very practical framework, a toolkit for delivery, with a set of actions and measurable key performance indicators that are all brought together under one roof, all brought together in one place. And we're pleased to say that the feedback that we've received so far has suggested that many of you are finding this useful. This new report here you can see on the right there. So just on to the next one there, Chris. In the end, this brings us to where we are today then. So we're going to present the report. We're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to go into more depth. We're going to unpack it for you. And we're also very pleased to say, as Flavie mentioned, that we're going to hear from one city that has already started on this journey to deepening the social impact of the visitor economy. We're very pleased to have Rachel McGuicken with us, who's the Director of Business Development, Sustainability and Transformation at Visit Belfast. And we're going to have time for a bit of a conversation with Rachel just after our presentation. So Chris and I are going to explain a little bit more about this. So for the moment, I'll hand over to Chris to explain then the structure of this new report.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. And hi, everyone. And I just thought it was useful to pause on this page just for a while, just to give an overview of these impact themes. As both Flavie and Peter have said, look, we know that DMOs across Europe are looking at social impact and community well-being because it's the right thing to do, which is great. And that's been set out in the various reports and strategies led by CityDNA over the years. But also we do realize that there's increasing pressure from local government and also commercial partners to also look at the targets and look at that target-driven approach. So we know from working with many of the cities on this call and throughout Europe and beyond that actually this is a real getting those actionable KPI targets is something that cities grapple with, looking at social impact alongside environmental impact and economic impact. So what we've tried to do is use our experience and use insights gleaned from the likes of yourselves and other cities to collate these social impact KPIs together, and also put together some practical examples of how we can make this happen in action, and then look at case studies. So altogether we have 8 impact themes. For each theme, we've presented 4 impact KPIs, so 32 KPIs altogether in this one toolkit, and then 4 sort of practical actions. And then the case study examples. So I think the few, I mean, we'll go through each theme because we've got a bit of time today to go through this, which is great. But there's just the one thing to point out from the outset is that you may think that some of these themes are beyond the remit of DMOs, and in many cases you'd be right. I'm thinking particularly of theme 7, which we'll come on to talk about, around sort of urban regeneration and physical renewal. And in many ways it is beyond the remit alone of DMOs. But I think the important point to stress at this stage is that whilst DMOs might not be in full control, they are part of the overall citywide story. And it's this concept of a place-based approach, really to be uniquely place-based. The measurement also needs to be place-based, and DMOs need to recognize their role within the wider city context. So I think that's important just to stress in this, that there are some KPIs that may be beyond the sole remit of DMOs, but that's not to say that they shouldn't still be recognized in our business planning moving forward. And I guess the only other one thing I was going to touch on is that if you think about this in a way of like the circular economy type way, if you think about it in that frame, then actually, you know, if we create better places to live if we build confidence amongst our residents and our local businesses, that in itself will come through as positivity in our cities and will ultimately enhance the overall destination proposition and the attractiveness of the city for those to visit. So whilst it's about making places better to live because of the social impact, it can also have a circular effect in terms of the visitor economy as well, in terms of the actual the attractiveness of the destination. So I think it's important to frame that and keep that in mind as we work through. So if we just go through to the next, so the first sort of theme that we wanted to pull out, this is about instilling ownership. So this is about recognizing that nobody really knows and understands our neighborhoods, our cities and our regions better than our local people, our local residents. And it's really about how we tap into that pool of knowledge and how we use this opportunity to co-design and shape visitor experiences with our local communities front and center. This inclusive approach to destination development should really be about exploring the type of tourism that really fits the city's needs. And I think that the only thing that we would stress at this stage is that this level of citizen participation and engagement is actually challenging. We know that from working with cities on this call and others. We understand that this is challenging. It's challenging to get people around the table. It's challenging to make sure conversations don't drop into the negative and stay positive. And it's also challenging that when we actually have these conversations that, okay, what do we do with this information? So it's not easy, but that almost makes the KPI more important. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, we've put some example KPIs. But I think the important thing to stress at this stage is that involving local people in tourism decision-making needs to be genuine. It needs to be authentic. It can't be a gimmick. And local residents will see through this, and ultimately this trust that you're trying to build up between the DMO and the residents it'll be detrimental if it's not seen as actually genuine, a genuine attempt to draw local people into the conversation. So I think when we look at actions that we can deliver against, we can look at things like citizens reference groups as a subset of the DMO. You could think about using existing structures that are already in place in your city, such as a number of cities we've worked with have citizens assemblies set up. There are community councils in parts of the UK. And certainly in Scotland, and we're working with one in Stirling. It's a really useful resource to have an existing community structure which is established, which is there and you can tap into. And I think it's really important that any of these conversations that we have as DMOs with residents are continuous, and they're continuous conversations, and they're not just used once and then dropped, but the relationships between DMOs and residents are ongoing, and that's something that's really important for future development. So when we look at the KPIs, we're looking at the number of opportunities for local people to engage in tourism decision making, but we also want to look and maybe measure the amount of tourism decisions which have been influenced by local people, the amount the percentage of resident recommendations which have been implemented in tourism projects or policy changes. And I think by setting that tangible KPI, that's a really big opportunity, and it really sort of sets the bar in terms of what we do with the information we get. The case study we pulled together for this particular section was from Berlin, the Tourism Citizens Assembly Advisory Council, which is one of these existing structures which exists. And there's 24 sort of representatives of neighborhoods in Berlin that come together to talk about tourism issues for the city. There's 2 people representing each of the 12 regions or neighborhoods in Berlin. And actually, from speaking to the team from Visit Berlin in Bologna, we talked a little bit about, okay, this is a structure which exists. It's exists for 2 or 3 years. The challenge is now, how do they show that this structure is actually working in terms of decisions being taken forward by Visit Berlin in the future? So whilst it's great to involve residents in the conversation, we also need to make sure that we're actually acting upon what we hear from residents in terms of delivery moving forward. So it's a really, if people have time, you should check out the Tourism Citizens Advisory Council in Berlin, and also chat to the people in Visit Berlin for a bit more information and in-depth information about how that actually works in practice. The second theme then is actually taking this one step further and building on this level of engagement, but also bringing then residents into tourism delivery so that residents can become partners and collaborators in tourism visitor experiences. So there are opportunities for, when we look at this, there's opportunities for cultural exchange between local people and visitors. And this is really great for enhancing visitor experiences, enhancing the destination proposition, but it can also really enrich the lives of your local residents. So, I mean, when we think about this, we're looking at things like community-led voluntary hosting, advocate services, greeter services. This level of engagement between visitors and local people, which really enriches everybody, enriches the proposition for the visitor, but also for the local people. So Another element we could look at there is through the likes of a community innovation fund or a incubator program where DMOs can actually empower and support resident-led tourism experiences. DMOs have a huge amount of opportunity in terms of mentorship. They can team up with other parts of local government in terms of funding, and look at sort of startup support grants for community-led tourism entrepreneurs and innovation in that way. And also DMOs, and many DMOs across Europe are looking at local stories and local visitor experiences and actually creating new bespoke online platforms just to sort of showcase and amplify tourism opportunities for resident-led tourism experiences. And this is something we would strongly advocate as well. And so when it comes to the KPIs, we're looking at the number of residents that are taking part in tourism delivery experiences, but also we can track the visitor, the percentage change in visitor satisfaction with resident-led tourism experiences as well, to understand that actually it's not just about involving residents in these tourism experiences just for residents' sake, but it actually is enhancing the destination proposition for the city as well. So that's a really strong KPI to look at in terms of bringing local people into the offering for the city. A really good example, a really good case study that we've come across is actually outside of Europe. Most of these case studies are inside Europe, but this one is from the States, from Cleveland. It's called the Destination Cleveland Local Advocate Group. And these guys have basically taken this sense of community ambassadors and they're bringing that into social media, and they actually have a team of local people, generally young people who have a strong sort of influence on social media, and they really try to bring these local residents together to advocate for Cleveland online through destination marketing, but also social media activity. And it's really strong sense that there's a togetherness of local people trying to promote the best of the city and the best that the city has to offer. And interestingly, they have built this has been a few years old now, but they've developed on this coalition, and they now have a Destination Cleveland, a meetings impact group, and also a talent alliance ambassadors for bringing talent into the city for inward investment as well purposes. So it's really interesting to see how that has actually had its own legacy in terms of that, I guess the power of the community and what that brings to that city. So again, we encourage you to go and have a look at that case study in a bit more depth as well. Peter, I'll pass you over to
yeah. Okay, thank you, Chris. So as you can see, this framework is looking at the question of social sustainability from many different angles. Some of these concepts will be more familiar than others, and I'm sure that this is a concept for those of you who have worked and been working during the pandemic will be very familiar with this one. It was definitely a trend that was accelerated. It wasn't unique to the pandemic, but it was definitely boosted during the pandemic, because as we know firsthand that many DMOs are looking at the local market in a very renewed way, from a spending point of view, from the economic power that they recognize that the local market had during the pandemic. But it's not just about the local people spending, it also goes deeper than that, when it's all about, for example, reminding residents that it's their city too. Many people, of course, went out and explored and got to know their own cities a bit better during the pandemic because they couldn't go a lot further. And this is also, of course, to do with some of those questions around over-tourism and how welcome or comfortable local people feel in their cities. It's a very obvious social sustainability question around tourism. So it's about the steps that DMOs can take then to help people feel comfortable and familiar with their own city and to keep them visiting their own city throughout the year. And of course, this is a market that you can rely on during the quieter periods as well. So it's about exploring their own city and then encouraging that greater sense of ownership. And then by extension, the civic pride, by encouraging people to explore their own city and realize that there's a lot more to their city than they necessarily imagined. Of course, it's normal for people to gravitate towards the center. So what often happens, and local people do that too. And then this is something which you can see from the case study at the bottom there. Amsterdam's been doing very well through its 1+1 or 1+1 free to culture initiative. It's essentially around the buy one get one free concept that's introduced for different cultural organizations, the number of organizations taking part in this offer. And this is an offer which is typically held during the lower season. It started, I think, during February, and it was extended to November as well. And it's a project that's evolving all the time, but it's a very nice initiative that we've seen here in Amsterdam. So there's different ways of measuring this phenomenon, this concept, whether it's around looking at the campaigns that are delivered and targeted at residents directly across the city, whether it's to do with the change in the visitor flows that occur in different neighborhoods as well, or as a result of those campaigns. And of course, that 1+1 initiative has been set up a little bit along those lines. And of course, it's about the exploration of new areas of the city, which actually relates very well to the next theme, Chris, on the theme number 4, about reaching out, spreading the positive impact of tourism across the city. So something I want to stress before I get into this is that this is not just about that simple, narrower question of dispersal, which obviously has been debated a lot, is discussed a lot as a sort of maybe a catch-all solution to dealing with increased visitor pressure in certain places. For us, it definitely goes much wider than that. It really is about looking at this question from the point of view of neighborhood activation, improving the spaces and the quality of life for local people across the city, starting with the needs of local people, of course, and then looking at how attractive different areas become for visitors as well. And of course, this still has to be done, keeping theme 1 in mind about instilling ownership as well. So it's not just about build it and visitors will come, but of course things must be done, of course, in collaboration and in consultation with local people. I think this theme is also about celebrating the fact that our neighborhoods and our different parts of the city have a different character, different origins, and a different social history. And these are all things that we can play with, that we can celebrate, and initiatives that we can build on then to reflect that. So there's different ways of measuring this, whether it's the spread of the visitor footfall around the city, the number of enhanced attractions that are built outside that are developed outside the centre, percentages of businesses in neighbourhoods that are engaging with different local residents or visitors, or experience an increase in revenue. And for this one, we really liked the Kretzel personality test that you can see that Vienna Tourism has developed, all to do with matching people with the character of the neighborhood of the different neighborhoods. And it's about increasing awareness then that there is a lot more to discover than the attractions just in the center. And then Chris, then on to number 5.
Yeah, and this really ties on really nicely from where Peter left off in terms of that spreading the impact across the city, because I think it's important to stress, and like it's not unique to any city, but deprivation and disadvantage really does exist in our cities and in our communities, and this is an unfortunate reality that we live in today. And many cities really suffer from sort of deep-rooted inequality, and it can be impacted by a sequence and a series of interconnected realities for people in living in our cities. And I think, unfortunately, negative media narratives can also ingrain these perceptions that exist in certain parts of our cities, and those narratives can then also become ingrained then to the people who live there, and there can be a real sense of disillusionment and disbelief and low self-confidence and low self-esteem from people who live in certain parts of the city. And I think that we have, as DMOs, there's not a unique opportunity to really counteract that narrative and change that narrative and change the story for a more positive one, and pull out the opportunities to sort of celebrate and enhance the cultural and the heritage offering for certain parts of the city. And really shine the positive light on certain parts of the city as well that maybe haven't necessarily had that opportunity in the past. And I think we're getting into sort of new territory for DMOs in a way here, that we could potentially be slightly more targeted in terms of how we look at the city and which parts of the city actually need real help and support, and which parts of the city can we make a positive difference and change as DMOs in terms of that counteracting of the negative media narrative that is potentially out there. So this is about changing perceptions and shaping perceptions and using our opportunity to do that. So what that could look like, it could look like inviting partnerships with influential media outlets and actually proactively designing fam trips specifically targeting some of the areas in need in terms of the negative media image which currently exists, and potentially looking at ambassador type programs and initiatives to involve local influencers, local well-known people to actually who are from those areas of our city which need a bit of support and need a bit of help. Community leaders being part of that. Potentially also looking at an online platform where we can celebrate the success stories and maybe local successful people who have come from certain parts of the city, celebrating the vibrancy of the city, the multiculturalness of the city, the opportunities for celebrating sport and heritage amongst that part of the city. But I think it's really important just that we could potentially be a bit more targeted in terms of how we look at our city and our role that we have to play as DMOs. And so when we look at KPIs, we're looking at the number of positive news stories which actually can be generated from a really targeted campaign, but also then that percentage in visitor perception or even local sentiment towards our city, neighborhood, or the targeted area that we're looking at. So I think it's a really big opportunity to track that positive media sentiment and to understand that there's an opportunity and a role there for us to play as DMOs in terms of changing that narrative. The next one then comes on. This is quite a nice theme where we actually look at how DMOs ourselves can actually have a direct impact on our city and our city's community well-being and our social impact. DMOs, by their very nature, are often very well connected in the city, and they also boast a workforce who are pretty generally passionate about the city that they work in, and many also live in. And I think we need to use that opportunity to enhance this level of social impact through the direct initiatives that we deliver as DMOs in our city. So they're uniquely positioned to both deliver on social impact, but also facilitate relationships. So one way DMOs can deliver, and actually Rachel's here from Visit Belfast, who I saw have just put 3 teams into the Belfast Marathon. But I think that's a really important thing to stress, is that DMOs are actually able to galvanize themselves and also take part in citywide initiatives and fundraising opportunities that are already taking place across the city. And we should be leading by example, and DMOs across European cities are already doing this. And I think this is a really important thing that we track and target and measure in terms of KPIs in our business planning, because I think this is a really vital way to sort of show that we're sort of flying the flag for social impact in our cities. And potentially Rachel might touch on that later when we have our conversation. Another way is looking at maybe like city impact days, cleanups where DMO staff can get involved in actual charitable activity. DMOs could also look to work with an annual sort of nonprofit partner, like a charity of the year, review that on an biannual basis. Also, DMOs have an opportunity. There's a number of programs out there in terms of a meet the buyer type program where DMOs match tourism hospitality businesses with travel trade. Potentially, we could look at flipping that on its head and actually linking tourism hospitality businesses with non-profit and community sector organizations who are doing good things in the city, and actually have a meet the buyer, but with a social impact frame of mind, which could be a nice opportunity to facilitate those relationships and those connections in the city, and use that unique opportunity that DMOs have as a connector in terms of citywide development. So in terms of KPIs, I think it's really important to look at how we actually measure the social impact that DMOs can raise directly, but then also through these relationships and these opportunities to connect as well, and also in-kind value of in-kind support that DMOs can offer. I'm slightly conscious of time, so I'll fire through this last one here from me and then hand over to Peter. Number 7, and I touched on this at the start, is looking at how DMOs can protect and enhance city assets. Vacancy and dereliction is also a challenge in our cities, and the physical landscape can definitely, certainly impinge on the health and well-being of our local people, but it also can then negatively impact on our destination proposition as well. And whilst DMOs are not going to be with the hard hats and high vis on always doing building work in our cities, I think DMOs can play a vital role in terms of supporting applications for development, looking at where development is needed in our cities, looking at public realm, looking at opportunities for city development, and thinking about urban design and visitor flow in a way which is more holistic. Also, I think DMOs can play a vital role in terms of the cultural and the heritage engagement of sites, and in terms of how we use the cultural opportunities to instill and be a catalyst for development in parts of the city which potentially need help and support. And so there's a real role that DMOs can play there. And also, and again, using our connecting capability to connect the cultural sector with the architects and urban designers, to have those conversations and facilitate those conversations, and ensure that we sort of enhance and sort of act as a catalyst for future growth. Also, we've seen a number of DMOs across Europe using AR and VR technology to really start getting people thinking around what might be possible in our cities. And this is something which DMOs are very well placed to potentially coordinate and deliver. So when it comes to KPIs, we're looking at the number of partnerships which are pulled together with artists and local community organizations that support cultural programming. We're looking at the percentage change in vacant properties and derelict spaces. And again, this may make some nervous because DMOs aren't never going to be in full control of this KPI, but actually, by being a catalyst and actually driving forward change, we should be confident to put it in there as a citywide KPI that we can contribute to. Because again, this then also can lead to a percentage shift in both residents and visitor satisfaction. And it's about creating this better place to live and better place to visit. And a really nice example of this is the design district in Helsinki, where Helsinki Partners works as one part of the jigsaw with the design district to really enhance that sense of what's possible and the creative spaces and the exciting sort of entrepreneurial design ethos that comes out of this design district area in Helsinki. I encourage you to go and have a look at what they're doing there in Helsinki for a bit of inspiration.
Thank you, Chris. Great. So just onto this last point then, as we've introduced this final of one of the 8 themes that we've been setting out, everyone's welcome. Now, of course, for DMOs, the concept of being welcoming or providing a welcome has often been done in very sort of practical ways when it comes to literally receiving visitors, having a nice space with an information center, and providing that level of welcome. For us, of course, we're looking at this also on a much deeper sense. The fact that it's part of a DMO's job then to make everybody feel welcome in the city, residents and visitors, regardless of their socioeconomic background, their racial background, sexual orientation or gender identity, or level of ability. And we know over the years that more and more DMOs have been looking at this question to see what they can do to help people from different backgrounds feel more welcome and more comfortable in the city. But as you may recall from the work that we did on the concept of the placemaking and marketing organization from last year, we're also looking at this in a deeper sense of encouraging cultural exchange and community cohesion. Those are issues which are more important than ever as we live in quite an atomized world. Often people feel quite vulnerable and angry, and we can also play a role in helping people to get along better, to understand, for communities to understand each other. And of course, fortunately, most cities have organizations that are already working on these questions in one way or another. So it's a question of partnering with them. We are, we can look at this in terms of, for example, that third indicator there of the number of events, festivals, or workshops or activities that promote diversity, inclusion, and cultural exchange, the number of partnerships we do set up with community organizations as well, but then also looking at improving accessibility, of course. I know that often these themes are looked at in quite a siloed way, but hopefully what we've done with this report is help to reorganize them in a different way that helps us go much deeper on the question of social sustainability. So as a conclusion, before I get onto the next slide, actually, just in a bit of a reflection then on this, is that you may have looked at many of the actions and areas that we've looked at today and thought, wow, this is going to be quite a big step for our organization to get involved in this, or is this really in our remit? Why should we do it? We're looking at this for, there's a sort of a narrower interest for DMOs, and as we've been talking about now for quite a few years on why should a DMO get involved in this, what it's also to do with the sustainability and the role of the organization itself, about finding a role that's relevant and is absolutely right in policy terms for the city. But also, as we can see, particularly with this final theme, it's just the right thing to do. And it will help to make sense, and it will also help to make sense for local people as well, and be good to see that as well. So Chris, we'll just jump onto the next slide then. No doubt you will also have been looking at some of these KPIs and have been wondering, how on earth are we going to measure that? Well, we know that DMOs don't always have it in their remit or their capability to measure all of these things by themselves, but fortunately there are many different ways of collecting data, not always also that don't involve a lot of money either, but that we need to use in order to measure the effectiveness of what we're doing, and also to help us build up concrete evidence that we can also then help to use to make the case for further investment as well. So there are a whole range of methods that can be used in terms of the measurement of these areas we've been looking at today. We don't really have a lot of time to go into each one of them, but in the report itself, we do explain these with specific tools that can be used in each case. And of course, we're very happy to talk about these with you as well. But they do, I think the key point we want to make here is that they involve working and partnering with other organizations across the city as well. So Chris, we'll just move on to the next one, because I'd like to get in some time to speak with Rachel. I think, I know you just had a couple of points to make here.
Yeah, I think really just one overall point is that there's no point really in capturing all these KPIs and measuring all these KPIs if we don't actually tell anyone about it. And I think there's a real onus on DMOs to not just look at these impact metrics, but also to report on them, to report on social impact alongside economic and environmental impact. And I don't just mean reporting to the board, but also DMOs should be reporting this to city partners and even residents, and looking at ways in which we can actually tell our sustainability story, both environmental and social sustainability. And we at TOPOSOPHY are bringing this into more and more of our city destination strategies that we look at and that we work with, is actually how do we tell the sustainability story? And that's the way to really capture the value from the social impact KPIs for DMOs, by actually using this not only to boost the reputation amongst city leaders, but also to use this to boost the destination attractiveness for the region as well, when we think about more socially conscious travel. So it's really important that we don't just capture, but we also measure and communicate our impact in our cities as well. So that's, yeah, Peter, I might just stop sharing there, and you can introduce Rachel, and then
of course, yeah. So yeah, as we mentioned, we've got someone with us who we know cares a lot about this topic, and it's been, Visit Belfast has been working for some time now on deepening the impact, the social sustainability of the visitor economy in the city of Belfast. It's a city itself which, of course, has seen a lot of changes and has very fascinating social history. I'm very happy to have got to know the city better from the work that we've been doing with Visit Belfast over the last just in the last year. So what we thought we'd do, actually, before we come on to the discussion with Rachel, we wanted just to hopefully show you a video. Is that going to work, Chris? If not, no worries. We can move on to the conversation. I think it has. Yeah, this is a video which explains very nicely a specific initiative in Belfast.
Today we are at the People's Kitchen Belfast. It's been operating for around about 2 years. We have an outreach team on the streets 6 nights a week. We have a food bank which operates 3 days a week, and also we have a drop-in on a Friday and Saturday night. Everybody who is part of the People's Kitchen is a volunteer. Food bank is a very busy part of the project, and we're seeing numbers increase week on week.
we, I guess, became aware of a big challenge in our city. Food bank usage and food poverty right across the UK and Ireland, and in Belfast is actually up 125%. We've partnered with our clients and with our industry to look at ways that we can raise funds and raise supplies to really support food banks right across the city, with a pioneering new initiative called Changing the Menu for Good.
If people are having an event, I think you do need to look at how you support and make sure it's sustainable. And I think working with Visit Belfast and how simple it is to actually incorporate, and it's really, there's only benefits to it, there's no drawbacks to getting involved.
Some of the real life stories and that the volunteers and the people that run the People's Kitchen just really bring you back to ground. They really help us to see that there are problems out there within our city. I feel we all need to do our bit to try and help. The beautiful thing about Changing the Menu for Good is, and in the way we're trying to approach it, it's the right thing to do, and it's good for business as well. You know, I'm finding now with international customers, if I don't have the right answers to the sustainable questions, I'm losing business.
Thank you very much, Chris. Excellent. Rachel, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you very much. We saw you in the video there explaining a little bit about the background to that project. Yeah, we're just curious to know a little bit more. I know that you've been working on this very closely with your colleagues. Perhaps you could just give us a bit more information then about how that originated and yeah, how you took the decision to get involved in something like this, because it's very new for a DMO to do.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at this really important topic, and I love the report, guys, so congrats on that. Yeah, so Changing the Menu for Good came about really about sort of 2022, and if you cast your mind back to that time, we all were coming out of the pandemic, and we were returning to live business events. But if you remember, it was still quite chaotic at that point. There was a lot of flight disruption, unpredictable delegate numbers, and also for us in the city, we realised that we were really at that start of the cost of living crisis that we now are all grappling with. So really there were two things, two problems I think we saw whenever we were coming back to the office. We saw that there was almost this sort of emerging, very visible crisis in our city with very visible homelessness and people really struggling. And food poverty really was a massive issue. And equally though, and this really tension between the events that we were attending at that point were half empty, and there was so much food waste. You couldn't, it was really remarkable. So on one hand, we had this real dilemma between an abundance of food and waste and events, and then, through to everything due to the unpredictable nature at that point. But then this really uncomfortable truth, I guess, that people that lived here year round in our city were struggling, and it really was at a crisis point. And we had actually some like social media feedback and tension happening around some of our restaurateurs sort of encouraging homeless people to kind of move along and that kind of thing. And we kind of thought, well, hang on, there's something wrong here around, that's not the solution. And, then again, we grappled with, is this our role to fix? Is this something, this is, as a DMMO, is this our role? But we kind of thought, well, look, there must be something we could do. And we spent a lot of time working with our industry to try and say, okay, well, our solution is, how do we get this abundance of food waste at business events? So you think of the breakfast, the buffet stations, the gala dinners, the uneaten desserts, all of that food, and how do we get that to food banks? And that was essentially our first attempt. But we hit up against a lot of different issues. First one is health and safety, allergens, regulation, liability. And probably the hardest hitting fact for me was then we actually spoke to food banks, and we actually spoke to them and really to understand the problem. And the problem that they had was not the problem that we thought it was. And I think that was a real wake up call, because we thought, okay, we need to get you this food. And they actually said, guys, with thanks for your help, but we don't need that, because if you're a single mum, you're looking a nutritious meal for your family. You're not looking for scones or we call tray bakes or pastries, or actually you're looking for something to feed your kids. And actually, a lot of people that present at food banks are also even looking help for like nappies and toiletries and all sorts of things. So it was a real wake-up call. So we knew about a problem, but we still didn't have a solution. So we asked, we rallied around our industry partners and people that were involved in big events. So our big catering provider, our convention centre, our university, and a couple of the big hotels that would have events. And we asked them to meet us at a food bank was the first point. And I think that was really important because we realised that not any of us had ever set foot in a food bank before. And if you hadn't, I think you'll really get your eyes open in terms of the working poor, the people that are really struggling to make ends meet. So it's quite a humbling experience because before we knew we had the problem, as I mentioned, just a point I thought was interesting was also they were coming out of a pandemic, if you remember. So whenever we told them about the challenge and we wanted their help, we did have a bit of pushback at the start. So some of the comments were, okay, is this social tax on my business? You know, I nearly lost my business. I'm making people redundant and so on. So we had a bit of work to bring the industry along. They were willing to help, but they also had been through their own business crisis. You know, I can't equate the two, but, you know, to be fair, that was a reality. So we met, we put them together and we said, okay, can you help? And essentially, we came up with the idea that we needed to raise funds. Actually, what the food bank and our charities needed was cash so that they could decide how best to, you know, intervene in their own community rather than us trying to just get food there. So that was the first big thing. And then we worked with our agency and the industry to kind of co-create some sort of campaign initiative that would get attention and shine a light and get a bit of curiosity around what we're trying to do. And also we wanted, the other dilemma we had was we wanted our business events and clients and delegates to feel good about helping, not bad about the problem. If that makes sense. So we didn't want them to feel guilted by the fact that they were attending a gala dinner, or we didn't want them to feel bad that they were going to, you know, a conference and, you know, there's food poverty here. So there was a really challenging piece there in terms of the messaging of this and getting that right, getting the tone right, and also not being patronizing around, you know, the tone as well. So we came up with kind of we came up with changing the menu for good. So it was a positive statement. It wasn't linked to any one charity because we wanted flexibility around there might be different charities and different causes that we help. And we came up with kind of 4 very simple ideas to try and inspire people to help. So the first one was actually around pass it on, and that was the most controversial. So that was asking our event organizer to pass on one element of catering at their event. So that might be, you know, the afternoon treats at 3 p.m. or indeed the dessert at a gala dinner and so on. That was controversial because, of course, that impacted the revenue for the hotels and venues involved. But nonetheless, we wanted to put that on the table. But interestingly, they came up with a better idea, which was around this 4th course, which was about, okay, if you think of a 3-course gala dinner, have an invisible 4th course, and the price per head would then be donated to changing the menu for good. And then we just had donate and round up in different ways to help. And I'm really proud to say that we have raised over £60,000 so far from that initiative, which
wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know how much that is in euros these days. But yeah, and that's nearly 50,000 meals that we've had, equates to 50,000 meals in our city. And to give you an idea, you know, the population of Belfast is about 350,000, you know, so that's a big impact. But what's interesting as well is how people are taking this and doing different things. So again, from a communications perspective, we were speaking to our event organizers, asking, but you know, did they want to get involved? And it was helping them because they also had a need to, you know, this big drive around legacy and impact around business events. CSR and social conscious values are very front and center for any corporate.
Of course,
yeah. So it was kind of good because it sort of also helped them solve a problem. It helped leave a legacy and a positive impact in the city. And also it's the right thing to do. And it actually made their delegates feel good as well about doing something positive, but they have actually come up with different ways to help. So I'm speaking a lot now, Peter, so I'm conscious you haven't got a word in.
No,
So
it's
happy to
I
take
have to
any
say, Rachel,
questions.
what I think has been really useful is that you've also highlighted for all of us here that you've highlighted really practical problems that you come up against, you know, and because getting involved in any of these issues that we've been talking about today naturally involves coming up against some of these small nuts and bolts issues, as we call them, that are involved. But what's really nice is to see that you've mobilized your team, you get out there in the streets, and you've been talking to local partners in particular, and you've managed to overcome some of these specific issues, and while also managing the image of the city, which in the end, of course, I know it's something everybody in all of the cities are dealing with, and they're very sensitive to as well. I wonder, Rachel, actually, just as we come towards the end, and I just will also ask if anyone's got any questions for you or us about what we've been speaking about today. I just wanted, I know that social sustainability is going to become more important for Belfast and your team over the coming years. I just wondered whether what impact some of the themes we've talked about today, which of those do you think are likely to become more important for the city, for Belfast, and how have you been having these discussions with stakeholders? Because as you said, you've got to take them with you.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Peter. And I think the report's brilliant. I could cheat and say all of them, but I genuinely mean that. But if I maybe hone in, I think we are with your help, we've obviously developed our 3-year strategy and action plan, and we're now leaning into some of the challenges around resident sentiment. We're going to be doing some work on that. So that's, I think, you know, really 1 and 2 there in terms of instilling ownership and people power. I think reaching out in terms of the positive impact of tourism. Uniquely in Belfast, we are lucky and fortunate that tourism has been a real genuine force for good in the city as a post-conflict destination. So we don't have a lot of opposition, and we haven't yet got to the point where we have problems generally for over-tourism yet. However, I do think our challenge is that we have a newly restored government here and a massive public sector finance crisis. And that is forcing, you know, why fund tourism over health, over education, and so on. Yeah. So basically this whole, you know, social impact, showing that tourism is genuinely a force for good. Here's how, you know, DMOs in our city and how tourism can help solve local problems and how visitors can pay it forward whenever they visit is really important for us. And we're doing this now, not just for us, actually our industry. We're going to do a survey of all of our industry, because also we realize that a lot of our industry partners are doing amazing things. But again, to Chris's point, they're not telling the story. And we don't have a global figure of what is the collective impact of our 550 partners. You know, all of them were out running the Belfast Marathon, not just us. They were all fundraising for charities. Many have community impact funds. They're doing CSR work, but who's actually totaling that up? So that we can have a narrative and evidence-based narrative around tourism is good for all of the reasons we know, economically and so on, but actually socially it's also really taking positive steps to support our city as well. So I think that's another one. Catalyst for change again, and destination stewards, I think, would be other themes. So a bit of all of them, if I'm honest.
Yeah, well, good luck, of course, as you get on with those as well. And it's been really nice to see how, in very concrete terms, you've already been putting this to work as well. So really, thank you very much for joining us, Rachel. And so just as in the last couple of minutes, just want to check if anyone has any questions. You can, of course, send them to us via email as well. Yeah, just want to check at this opportunity if anyone wanted to mention anything or anything that they've seen that really resonates with what they're going through as a destination as well. Okay, well, no problem. Well, yeah, just a final mention then that, of course, this has come as part of our research and intelligence work. We do there are a lot of other areas to our business too. And we are, of course, happy to talk to you about any of them. We really enjoyed working on this project. We know that it's something that's going to grow organically. in different ways in different cities with different partners. And of course, we look forward to continuing with you the conversation, and of course also with our friends through the CityDNA community as well. So to wrap up, yeah, maybe just hand over very quick final goodbye from Flavie.
Yeah, thank you so much, Peter, and thank you so much to all of you. The recording of this session will be available on our intranet, but also on our website publicly. So don't hesitate to share that with your colleagues and also members, but also non-members. We also like to highlight the work that we are all doing together. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much, Peter, Chris, and Rachel for sharing your valuable insights, and see you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice afternoon.
Thanks.